County Board of Zoning Appeals to order. Who is not here? Oh, everybody's here. Bill, Hill. The members here, Bill Peterson, Jeff Ritter, myself, Alex Sharp, Ron Apple, and Julie Coombs. The first item is to review and adopt the agenda. Ron just brought up the fact that we should probably do something about our budget. Did you want to suggest adding that at the end?
Yeah, I mean, we're supposed to provide budget information to the administration, and
Okay.
we haven't done that.
Okay. Then. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I would like to add an item to new business, and that would be a discussion on the zoning maps. And that we have an issue coming up this evening that has to do with zoning maps, and there's 4 of us on the board. I think it was the first time we've seen a zoning map, and we have concerns. So I think we need to discuss that and perhaps make a recommendation to the board supervisor.
Okay. Is there anything else?
So,
Anybody else?
I move that we adopt the agenda as, with the addition of discussion of the budget as well as zoning maps.
And those will be added at the end, just before adjourn. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Okay.
I'll second it.
He seconded. Thank you for catching that. Good. Okay, the minutes from the January meeting. Any?
You know, I would like to move adoption of the minutes with the corrections made by Ron.
Okay.
I guess would be the second draft. Would it be the second draft?
I'll second that.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay.
And this version on BoardDocs, that's Ron's version, correct?
And that's up there.
Yeah, actually, I think they were both on there, but the corrected ones, not corrected, just
Okay.
updated, a few minor changes.
Now we're going to enter the public hearing. We have 2 tourist homes, but first we're going to do a variance application. And the first application is Thomas, and this is up in what do you call it, Falls? What?
Twin Falls.
Twin Falls, yes. Okay. Are you? You're representing?
Yeah.
Okay, you can come forward if you want.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rick Thomas.
Well, no, this is the public hearing. This is the first application. The public comment will open later.
Okay.
But yes, that's fine.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rick Thomas. Thank you for this opportunity. The only thing that I'm asking for in this application is that you move the setback, the rear setback, from 100 feet to 74 feet. No changes on the other 3 sides. This will allow space for a clean rectangle of a building envelope compared to what I have now with a 100-foot setback, which is a 10-cornered building envelope, which is highly unsuitable for design or construction. My purpose is to build a modest 1-story dwelling that would serve as a guest house for family members and friends. My wife and I have a home nearby on Old Browntown Lane. This variance would remedy a hardship that began in 2012 when I bought the property, on the basis that it turned out that the plat involved in the transaction was inaccurate. And it was a mistake that was not discovered until 2016 when I had a purchaser for the property. And in conducting his due diligence, he discovered what he thought was stacked both conservation and agricultural zoning, was his finding. But in any event, it killed the deal. Then in 2018, I obtained a water and sewer permit from the county to build on the lot, but it was premised on the 100-foot setback and the 10-cornered envelope, which again is unsuitable. So I really could do nothing with the permit. It brings us up to the day. It's a very special lot. It has 220 feet of stream footage, and with a favorable ruling from the board, I will be able to bring it up to its full residential potential. Thank you.
Is there any questions from anybody on
Yes. Having done quite a bit of research on this, I've come up with a couple of questions that I think are relevant to the requirement for variance. And one of them has to do with whether in fact the zoning qualifies as agricultural or conservation. But on Saturday I came upon a state code that I think is even more relevant, and I think we probably need to discuss that, because it has to do with recorded plats or final site plans to be valid for not less than 5 years. It's State Code 15.2-2261. That code starts out with the fact that an approved final subdivision, and the history on this property is interesting. It's very Rappahannock. In 1988, I believe it was resurveyed for Chris Parrish, and that survey was submitted to the county and approved. But on that survey is written in small letters in the corner the fact that the property can no longer be subdivided.
How big was the property then?
But
How big was the property then?
13.6 acres, I believe is what it is. That's the, and I got we saw the plan has gone to everybody on the
You're
board.
welcome to sit down.
Yeah.
We'll get you when you need.
So that began it. And then in 2011, the Batchelders apparently bought it from Chris Parrish. And then in 2011, the Batchelder Trust had it resurveyed and subdivided into 5 lots. And each one of the lots has a home site on it,
You mean depicted on the survey?
depicted on the survey. That was submitted to the county and approved.
And the county signed off on it?
John McCarthy signed off on it. That was in 2011, November of 2011. So now when you go to 15.2-2261 on approved final subdivisions, and I'm not going to read all this, but anyways, once it's approved, it's valid for 5 years. The county can't come back in and make changes or whatever. The developer basically has got a guaranteed 5 years, and that is renewable. But when you get down to the final portion of the law, subset F, if a portion of that property is sold to a third party, that what is on property that he bought becomes valid indefinitely. So basically, Mr. Thomas bought a property in 2012, and as being the third party, the way I'm not a lawyer, I've read the code, and this appears to be what it says. is that as the third party, when he bought it, that what was on the plat, which includes the home sites, was valid indefinitely. So when he bought a property with a valid home site, he's got a valid home site right now, he doesn't need a variance. And that is for the rest of the board to, we need to make that decision, but if that is the case, then a variance becomes a moot point.
But only to the extent that it's still kind of up in the air to him.
But
Only to the extent that, or only accepting the fact that it's still up in the air as far as he's concerned, because there's not really a determination.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak to Mr.
Yeah,
Mackle's
Oh, yeah,
comment
sure.
for a moment?
Yeah.
I appreciate Mr. Mackle's observations, and I think the board should take into account the effect of 15.2-2261 on this application. I think it's an apt observation on Mr. Mackle's part. I did want to address a couple of the things that Mr. Mackle was bringing out in his summary of the history of the property. The Batchelder, I beg your pardon, the parish, when Mr. Parrish owned this property, it was a property of roughly 60 acres, around 55 acres. That plat that was approved when the property was divided back then was in 1980. And that was before the adoption of our current zoning and subdivision ordinance in December of 1986. So I know that there's a stamp that appears on that plat that has that broad language that they put, it may not be re-subdivided, but that was under a prior zoning and subdivision ordinance and not under the zoning and subdivision ordinance that we now presently have. The way it appears from my research in the land records, the way that the Batchelders were able to subdivide this property was the fact that in addition to the 15-acre piece that they purchased from Mr. Parrish, they also purchased 3 separate lots in Twin Falls subdivision. And so the way that parcel was divided was by way actually of a boundary line adjustment survey, not an actual subdivision survey. So they boundary adjusted into each of those parcels, in each of those lots, I should say. In Twin Falls subdivision, they boundary adjusted in a piece of this 15-acre lot to create 3 lots that were more attractive in their shape and size, and left this 1.43 acre residue. So in a sense, even if you think that somehow that stamp that Evan McNear, the prior zoning administrator, applied to the plat was somehow binding, even though that was done in 1980, I would submit to you that in fact there wasn't a subdivision of a new parcel. It was actually by way of a boundary line adjustment that this lot came into existence. I appreciate Mr. Mackle's observation, because I do think that it's within the purview of this board to decide that, the zoning administrator in 2011 approved this boundary line adjustment survey. It got recorded, and a mere 5 months later, Mr. Thomas purchased this 1.43 acre property on the basis of that plat that was then in existence in the land records that showed a house site, as Mr. Mackle points out, and showed 100-foot front and 50-foot side and rear setbacks. So the reason that we're before you tonight is really on the question, was Mr. McCarthy's approval and the recording and the reliance on that recording of that boundary line adjustment plat, was that sufficient and binding under section 2261 for this board to make a determination, well, for whatever reason, Mr. McCarthy approved this. It was done by way of a boundary line adjustment. It shows 100-foot front, 50-foot side and rear setbacks, and that's what the applicant should have. If that's this board's determination this evening, we'll give you the elbow bump, thank you, and we'll be on our way, because that will be more than sufficient to allow Mr. Thomas to make the modest use of this property that he seeks in connection with this lot, which is to build a modest dwelling on it. But that requires the board's, I think the board's determination. I don't want to be disingenuous about it. I think that requires this board's determination that you can make a finding that what Mr. McCarthy did as zoning administrator, that landowner relied on, and then this purchaser relied on 5 months later, is now sort of the law of the land as far as this lot is concerned. If that's not the case, then we need to delve into the other standards for the issuance of a variance. I won't belabor the board's time right now. I would like to reserve some time to speak to that later. But I think very clearly, in this case, this applicant ticks all the boxes on the standards for a variance under 15.2-2201, and therefore it would be appropriate to grant him the variance if that's the ultimate finding of this board. Thank you. I appreciate the time to speak.
I have one other question. I looked at the zoning map. It looks as if one thing is, I also drove up to the property, and the property doesn't really fit the description of what a conservation zone should be. I mean, it's flat, it's not got, it just doesn't fit any of the definitions of a conservation zone. So it seemed to me like that they just made a mistake when they drew this, and they drew it through the property line. So that was my other question was, whether or not there was a challenge.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Ritter, I appreciate that. It's clearly a borderline property. The zoning map depicts it in the way that you described. I think your characterization of the lot itself is a fair one. There is a drain field and variance plat that are in your submission materials, prepared by Mr. Cairns. I think I have that right. That shows that in fact, sort of at least the western 2/3 of this property is actually fairly flat. It's a fairly flat lot. It does get steeper over on the sort of the eastern or northeastern third of the property as it drops off towards Waterfall Branch. On that basis, I made the argument to Ms. Summers, our zoning administrator, that maybe it would be appropriate to find that in fact this lot was more properly classified as agricultural than conservation. She took a look at it in good faith. She's made the determination that no, that the conservation zoning is the one that should be applied to your analysis. That doesn't override what Mr. Macklow has already observed about the recordation of that plat. But to be fair, Ms. Summers at this point has made that determination. We've got 30 days to appeal it. Depending on what happens tonight, maybe we have to note an appeal of that, but I'll reserve that for later.
Thank you.
I mean, we have given other variances, I know, in this subdivision. Did Roger Batchelder actually create that subdivision in the past? Was he the one who?
Technically, Mr. Sharp, I think it was actually after Roger died. Jane was still living.
No, but I mean years ago, the twin.
Oh, you mean the original subdivision? No, sir. I don't think that was Roger. I believe that was someone else.
Okay, but that was all well before the ordinance.
The Twin Falls subdivision, I'm going from memory here, was the late 50s, maybe 1960, 59, 60. So it was before our very first.
Okay, but before there was.
Yes, sir.
Well, so what I was getting at before Mr. Brown elaborated a little bit on that was it might be helpful for us to make some sort of determination rather than just leaving it kind of hanging that we think that there's a legal reason why it doesn't need a variance, and then therefore they have to kind of go and you don't have anything really that says that what he wants to do is acceptable. So that would just be my motivation for getting some type of a decision for them that would leave them unambiguously knowing that it's approved rather than just leaving it on.
I'm not proposing to leave it. I'm proposing that we make a decision based on 22.6 or 2261 that when Mr. Thomas bought the property, the house site went with it, and so he does not need a variance.
Okay, and I would
and basically he can leave and move on and start building his house.
And I would maintain that I think we could give him a variance because, I mean, it probably does meet all of the criteria that we would require to grant a variance, and I'm sure we can go through those criteria, but I think that a variance, because he is needing a variance from the setback of, is it 20?
No.
26
No.
feet.
Wait, I'm saying he needs a variance from the conservation zone setback. And, you know, you can say that he already has one, but, I mean, maybe that was one staff generated, but still, it could be reaffirmed by us. That would be my position.
It's up to the rest of the board, but the county approved the lot with the home site in 2011.
But what does he have to carry with him that says that if we don't take action?
We are taking action, but we're taking an action that has nothing to do with a variance. It has to do with the fact that the code of Virginia says that when he bought the property, the house site went with it, so he does not need to come here and request a variance.
But that sort of leaves them unsatisfied, I would say. Is that correct? I mean, in a sense.
Could we just say that we substantiate the plat as registered when it had the house site on it? Does the house site as it exists on that registered plat, is that any variation from what you desire?
Correct.
It's okay, it's acceptable.
It's exactly the same
That
spot.
is the,
That's more than what Mr. Thomas is requesting tonight.
Right, but if we just substantiated the fact that as it exists, as you bought it, as it was depicted and registered, that that's the way it is, then is that enough?
I think what maybe Mr. Sharp is getting, I don't want to speak out of turn,
No,
but
that's fine.
Mr. Finkelman, I think what Mr. Sharp is getting at is that what you have before you tonight is an application for a variance.
Yeah.
And in essence, what Mr. Mackel is suggesting is that you would actually deny the request for the variance, but deny it on the basis that the plat that was recorded in 2011 establishes the valid use and the setbacks of the property, and therefore no variance is necessary, which Mr. Sharp suggests is cold comfort maybe for the applicant, except that if we can take that decision and Mr. Thomas can get his building permit on that basis, we'll be perfectly happy and go into that good night. So
Well, the next question would be, if we don't do the variance, will the next purchaser run into the same problem, have to keep coming
Well, I
back?
say if he gets a bill, well, that's why I say we should.
what would happen, Ms. Ritter, is that if Mr. Thomas, if his plan goes forward, he's going to apply for his building permit, and on the basis of your decision tonight, the zoning administrator is going to issue her zoning permit to go along with the building permit. So it really wouldn't come up for a subsequent purchaser of the property.
But he's probably not going to be able to get further encroachments into the setbacks other than what he's asking for
no.
in the future.
It's still going to be less than what actually the
Yeah,
2011
it's
plan.
still, they are what they are as they were approved in 2011.
But you'd be okay if we granted him a variance based on the validity of this plat?
I don't believe we can have the findings to grant him a variance
Okay.
because of this information. There's no hardship.
Well,
There's
the
no hardship
the
because he bought
hardship,
a piece of property and it was approved. So how can we say that there's a hardship?
the hardship is right now, there's a question about whether he can build what he wants to fit that house site because he is violating these setbacks for that zone. And so if we can give him that determination, we are in effect giving him a variance from the requirements of the conservation zone, even though maybe they have already been granted. But I don't see a problem with giving him that variance.
Variances, you read on variances, it's an absolute last resort.
Well, it is.
That is the way the state,
He
that's
has
why-
no other option.
That's why they're here.
yes, he does. His option is that he doesn't need the variance because he's had the right to build on the property since he bought it in
Well, he
2012.
wouldn't be here though if that was the case.
Yeah,
It was
if the
summer, so
building
shaking her head
office
no.
We
does,
were not aware of of Mr. McKayla's finding when we brought the petition to the board. So this is new information, so.
well, I tell you what I might do. Not if there's more discussion, but otherwise I might open the public hearing. And just to see if there's anybody, you've said,
We've set it up there.
and nobody else? Okay. I'd like to open the public comment period. I see somebody maybe looking like she wanted to speak.
Hey there.
You can identify yourself.
Hey, Rick.
They need to be sworn in?
Oh,
Well, are you giving evidence or what? are you-
I'm not giving any evidence, I'm offering an opinion, an observation.
Sure, that's fine. I think that's fine.
I'm happy to be sworn in, though.
No, but go ahead.
Hey, I'm
What's
Kimberly
your name?
Messersmith, and I live on Old Browntown Lane. We're neighbors, we're all neighbors. And just here tonight, look, so what you found, Mr. Michaela, is true that you are granted the opportunity to build and build accordingly to the home site. That's great, because you know it's not a variance. What I'm concerned about is a variance on our road. We have, like, look, every property in Rappahannock is special, right? We have an incredibly special road with a great group of neighbors. We all do road cleanup, we all work together. But what we don't want to have is a variance, because there are still properties that are for sale, that remain for sale on that road. So if Rick's offered a variance, then that sets legal precedent. And so whoever comes in to buy those remaining properties, they then have the opportunity to secure a variance because the precedent is set. So if Rick and Julie can go ahead and build on their property as it is, fantastic. It's that variance that really gives me a little bit of heartburn.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Is there anybody else?
Yes, I'm Tim Bills. I'm also a neighbor. I'm actually, my partner and I own the property that abuts Mr. Thomas. My issue I have here is that this is a stream. The property line runs right down the middle of the stream. If Mr. Thomas is allowed to build up to that stream, you know, I can't do that because I own 50 acres and I have to be 100 feet from the stream. And that stream is a sensitive stream. And I'll let Herb talk to that, but, you know, we have some concerns about this. And it's not your typical piece of property up in there. We are all neighbors. We all do get along very well. But this really has kind of put a wedge, at least in our relationship, because we don't feel that somebody should be encroaching on that stream in that manner. And I think it's important that you realize that the line is in the middle of the stream. So, you know, approaching that is not acceptable to me. A couple other things, you know, in their justification, they implied that the property in question is difficult to sell. Well, in February of 2018, I emailed Mr. Thomas and I expressed to him our desire to purchase that property and to keep it as a vacant property, as a buffer zone for the stream. And Mr. Thomas replied, I appreciate your potential interest in the lot abutting Sean's property, Sean Hemrick. And if it were to go to the market, we would include you among the first notified. With its manageable size and stream frontage, it is indeed a special property. It is a special property. And I think putting a house of this size and encroaching on our property line is taking, you know, a step backwards.
Could I ask you just a quick question? Sure. Is the variance seems to be on the other side of the property from the stream, is that correct?
He's asking for a variance on the rear of the property, which I assume is the...
That's what I'm saying, right here.
Yeah, on the rear property line.
But the stream, the creek is showed over here.
I'm not sure what map you're looking at.
There's a creek, and there's the variance.
This is property here.
Yeah.
I assume the front of the house would face the road.
I haven't even seen this one, so,
Okay.
but that was an old proposed house. That was, I think
But this
when he
is-
proposed, when he got the,
But this is where the variance is, so,
no, the variance is back here.
okay.
This is the roadway.
Okay, okay.
This is the road
Okay,
here,
that's
the street's there.
That's fine, okay. Okay, sorry.
So my point there was that, you know, the justification statement implied that Mr. Thomas wasn't able to sell the property because of the setbacks, and that's simply not true. It was never.
Pardon me.
Okay, hold on.
What I said was,
Hold on,
excuse me, I'm sorry.
This one, we'll just wait on that.
Another point I want to bring up is there is implications to our property. Anytime someone encroaches on your property line, it diminishes the value of your property. And if I wanted to build a house on that stream, you know, then that diminishes the value of my property. And like I said, we can't do that because we would have to be 100 feet from his property line. So, but I guess what I'd really like to point out, you know, is at what point are these small lots, you know, we're going to take a serious look at these small lots. You know, the comprehensive plan says that we want open spaces in our county. And if we are on a private road, a private lane, and if we, you know, continue to have, you know, clustered construction, it goes against what the county, you know, what the comprehensive plan is trying to do out there. So, you know, that's my concern. Those are my concerns, and I appreciate you listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, the other party, the other
Could
party.
you identify yourself?
My name is Herb Nixon. So I just wanted to read back a little bit of how I feel about this.
Excuse me, just for you, because I'm confused as to where your property,
Yeah, where is it?
where your property actually
Same
is.
landowners?
Our property,
Is it across the
We're-
road?
Okay, so like when you look at the plat map, the stream
plat
is
map.
the border. So they're asking for the variance toward the stream, which is toward our property.
Creek.
The creek,
Okay.
waterfall branch.
Okay, great.
So basically, I see a name like George and Bowling, is that the property you own then on the other side of the stream?
Yeah.
Are you on the other side of the stream from,
yes, bowling will go.
Oh, you bought it from Karen, did?
Karen did,
Oh,
correct,
okay.
yes. Our parcels were subdivided.
Okay.
184, they bought 50.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm here today in opposition of the variance that is being requested along the south border of our 50-acre property on 76 Old Browntown Lane in Huntley, Virginia. We are located in an environmentally sensitive area deemed a conservation district. Within a conservation district is noted as item 17035 Virginia District Regulations that careful consideration is given to the predominant use and character, physical limitations, accessibility, and ability of the county to provide public services and environmental consequences of the various uses. Most notably, in a conservation district or mountains, they're deemed environmentally sensitive where regulations are designed with emphasis on the conservation of those areas to minimize the potential adverse environmental impact while providing for compatible very low density residential uses. When we bought our 50-acre property up on Old Browntown Lane, we were aware we were buying a conservation district and what those laws and regulations were. Quite frankly, those laws and those regulations are why we bought in this area of a conservation district to begin with, low density. Our goal was to take a piece of land and keep most of it in tune with what would be required of a conservation district. Just to give us a little history of what we've done with our 50 acres. 20 acres of the 50 were devastated by invasive species such as the common bittersweet vine. We worked with Blue Ridge Prism to find the best way to mitigate the problem. We found that cutting each of these vines individually and avoiding broad area spray pesticides would be most effective control while maintaining the ecology of the stream. And that's what was important. We spent our first year clearing those large percentage of vines and bringing back the tree canopy and preventing those vines from reaching the parkland above us and our neighbor's property. The reason I'm mentioning this is because this is what being in a conservation district is about to me. Like we are below the park, and we could have let this go just like, you know, it was left go in the past, and that would have spread into the park, but we knew what we were getting ourselves into. We also carefully selected a building site for a house that was over 1,000 feet away from the stream. At that point, we could have built up to 100. It would have been beautiful. We would have heard it all the time, but we knew that the stream was environmentally sensitive. In an effort to prevent any type of negative impact on the valuable environmentally sensitive resource that borders our property and our neighbors, while maintaining the low density requirements on the 1 acre we set aside to build on far away from the stream. This was to prevent any kind of potential damage or runoff or erosion to that stream. Waterfall Branch, which is the stream that borders our property and Rick's, used to have a large brook trout population. Over the years, that population has dwindled. We know this because in an effort to do work to restore the brook trout habitat of the environmentally sensitive stream we share with our neighbors, we reached out to Piedmont Environmental Council in an effort to see what all would be needed to take reparative action on the stream and bring back natives. The State of Virginia and Piedmont Environmental Council has done a stream survey on Waterfall Branch and found native species in peril that we thought were likely near obsolete. One of them being the American eel. And in an email I have here from the Piedmont Environmental Council, they talk about what they found in that stream survey. And one of the things is they found brook trout, which was exciting. They measured and clipped them so they could follow them, and in a project they were working on with SCBI. The clippings would help them identify the individuals in future surveys. We also found several American eel, which are a species of conservation concern, and benefit from the same habitat improvements that help brook trout. So it's great, you know. That's great because one of our main efforts coming into this, we were worried that, you know, this stream probably has already suffered a lot, but would it be possible to see what's in there and what we could bring back within a conservation district? So our plan was to start surrounding rehabilitation around the edges of the stream, which would be required to help get those native species back to the stream. Imperative efforts will be to remove more of the invasive plants around the stream and plant natives, important for brook trout habitat. This is a passion both Tim and I, as fishermen, that sort of thing, just always wanted to do since we've gotten this property. You know, if the regulations inside of a conservation district are not upheld, we have no desire to do that. What's the point, right? If people are going to build right on a conservation, environmentally sensitive stream, that just defeats the purpose to me. As you can see, my rejection for a variance request does not solely rely on the fact that a neighbor is trying to build with 100-foot setbacks within a conservation district or a property. That's a large part of it. The property line is an ecologically sensitive stream because of our efforts listed above falling in line with what is expected of a property owner in a conservation district. Any building so close to the stream that could cause any kind of devastating effects due to runoff or further bank erosion is unacceptable. We choose to abide by regulations when building in a conservation. We chose to abide by regulations when building a conservation district, and we expect our adjoining neighbors to do the same. I know our neighbors who stand with us and against the variance request know that building on a lot that's just over 1 acres is also a concern. Conservation district requires a minimum conventional 5-acre lot size with a maximum density dwelling of 1 house per 25 acres. With all due respect, putting a leach field, a well, and a house on 1.4 acres up against a stream in a conservation district, and this being an ecologically sensitive stream, and requiring a variance to do that, just doesn't seem logical to me with fitting in with that conservation district, or what's deemed as a conservation district. I just want to.
Are you able to wrap it up?
Yeah. One other thing I want to point out is, the effects it has on us directly. On the right way back, Browntown Lane that crosses our property, there's a bridge that all the neighbors must utilize to move up and down the mountain. The bridge is located just below the site where Rick plans to build and is already sinking into the stream that needs to be replaced at some point. There's been much talk about it with the neighbors over time, and we think for the reasons above that will be beneficial. However, I'm concerned that additional clearing from building and that runoff into the stream is also going to cause more water to flow over the bridge, thus sinking it further, and then, which it has in the past, it floods and then floods out our driveway and the whole way down Browntown Road. So without knowing that, the consequences to the environment are greater than, the desire for residential building inside of a concert.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem, thank you.
Is there anybody else?
We all have owned property.
What is your name?
Jeff Trainer. So I'm a property upstream. I have about 100 acres. So I'm the largest property owner on that part of the mountain, and have tried to prevent as much development up there as I possibly can in order to keep the setbacks and to keep everything sort of intact. I think it's really important to realize that we've all owned property for a long time up there together. And Rick was a longtime homeowner up there before he ever bought this lot. So he knew the sensitivity, knew the setbacks, knew the restrictions going into the purchase of that transaction. So trying to retrofit, knowing that we all are very familiar with that landscape and with that road, in my mind is just completely inappropriate. We have all gotten lots of legal advice through the years in terms of how to manage these small lots, and we have been told consistently, year after year, that no matter what those zoning lines are, that we need to abide by the conservation setbacks. And that was clearly articulated through all of our community and all of our road before this acquisition ever happened.
Thank you.
I'm Ann, board approving, and I'm also an old Browntown neighbor and property owner. And I also am concerned about whether this is a variance or it's a relaxation of the conservation setbacks, whatever it's described as now. I'm concerned about the detrimental impacts on the surrounding area. As you've heard, Old Browntown is a private road. It rises steeply up to the park. We have multiple streams, steep slopes, and steep valleys. And it is appropriately zoned as a conservation district, and in order to minimize the environmental impacts and also accommodate low-density residential use. So I'm concerned, like everyone else has described here, that relaxing the setbacks would be a slippery slope or set an unfortunate precedent because of the legacy of these small lots that were created 60 years ago. We've had to really struggle to protect each piece to conserve the whole. And that's the way we've tried to deal with this. Several of us, including myself, have managed to purchase the small lot next door. I had a very similar situation a couple of years ago with someone wanting to build without having the space for the proper setbacks. Having that plat signed by John McCarthy in 2011, the exact same situation. And unfortunately, we were able to purchase the lot after much distress and create a buffer from encroachment. So I personally really cherish the beauty and serenity of the area, and I do hope we can protect it.
Okay, thank you. Is it anybody else? Okay, I'm going to close the public comment section. Any further comments? Any thoughts? Oh, I guess
Petitioner to respond.
if you have a response to, I think there was one item you wanted to respond
Let me
to.
say one thing. My comment was that, not that the lot is unsaleable, But in that particular transaction, that killed the deal. I didn't say generally speaking, which is what, I have other standing offers in addition to Mr. Bill's, actually.
Okay.
Still desirable.
And if I may observe, Mr. Chairman, I won't take up a lot of the board's time, just a couple of moments to provide some rebuttal to some of that. The standard for a variance has nothing to do with whether you can sell your property or not. We mentioned in the statement of justification the way that this first came to Mr. Thomas's attention, which was in the context of a sale to a third party. But that's not what we're asserting is the basis for a justification for the variance. The justification is found in the definitions in the Code of Virginia, which is in 15.2, 2201. And I appreciate the comments that the other, particularly the other speaker, raised about the environmental concerns. I'm not going to diminish those, and I'm not going to suggest that they're wrong to be concerned about that. I would understand that as well if I was an owner of that property. But unfortunately for their argument, that's not one of the criteria that this board is directed to apply in considering a variance. The criteria that this board is to consider is whether a reasonable deviation, that's the standard that's set forth in our definitions now, whether a reasonable deviation from the provisions regarding the shape, size, or area of a lot, I'm going to skip over, or the size, height, area, bulk, or location of a building, when the strict application of the ordinance would unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property, and such need for a variance would not be shared generally by other properties. That's the standard that is currently in the Code of Virginia. And while I appreciate the statement regarding some perceived environmental impact, that's not the standard that this board needs to apply. I also, I feel like I need to respond to the statement that was made that, that somehow this variance would allow Mr. Thomas to build up to the street. Or that somehow the granting of this variance would allow Mr. Thomas to encroach upon a boundary line. I think you'll see in your submission materials, we're talking about on the one corner, we're still talking about line L13, a distance of 100 feet off of Waterfall Branch, which is exactly what's permitted in the Conservation Zoning District. On the other corner, line L11, that's the variance. That's the maximum variance that we're seeking tonight, which again is only about 25 feet. Is that admittedly 25 feet closer to Waterfall Branch? Yes, it is. But that's why the board needs to consider the criteria that you have to consider under the Code of Virginia as to whether, if you apply the strict application of this ordinance and you see the little triangle that you're left with in the center of the property, whether you can find that leaving Mr. Thomas with that little triangle there in the middle of the property would not unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. It also bears pointing out that, again, one of the things that you're cautioned about in the variance cases and in the commentary to the code is that you shouldn't be granting a variance that would allow somebody, and this is something that we see from time to time, a variance that would allow somebody to come in and make a use of a property that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to make. And that's not the case before you this evening. Probably the most common use of properties in the Conservation Zoning District is to have a single-family dwelling on it in Rappahannock County. And that's all that this applicant is seeking tonight, is a use that is a by right permitted use in the Conservation Zoning District. So we respectfully submit that while we appreciate the observations regarding some perceived environmental impact, in this case, the standards for a variance are clearly favor this variance application, and he is only seeking the absolute minimum variance necessary to let him make a modest, reasonable use of this permitted use of this property.
And the drain field is about where it says proposed drain field?
Yeah, the proposed drain field would be there in that front area of the property. Again, trying to push it as far away as possible from Waterfall Branch. Yeah, if this board found that it was more appropriate to grant Mr. Thomas a variance, now this is not the application that's before you, But if this board found that it was more appropriate to grant Mr. Thomas a variance from the front setback, and push that dwelling towards the front of the property and away from Waterfall Branch, well, then he's got to have somewhere to shift that drain field. And more likely, it's going to then have to shift around and closer to Waterfall Branch.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a clarification question here, and the plat that we received doesn't match the plat that I'm seeing on the screen right now.
Isn't that the same?
No, that's what I'm looking at, is that the one we have has a 40 by 20 foot house proposed.
So that was an earlier, I think a drain field plat, Mr. McElroy. This, I can assure you, that plat is also in your materials. That's
Well,
the actual
okay,
variance.
because this, like I said, what
Yeah.
what I was given,
Is that dated October?
it's not,
Yeah, they look similar. They do look
yeah,
similar.
they certainly do, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
Because with the way that house is, I've blown the portion up on this plat that I was given and sort of measured things out, and it appeared on this, the plat that I was given, that you could actually build a 20 by 30 foot footprint, which would give you 600 square feet, and then make it 2 stories, and you got a 1,200 square foot house, which is an acceptable sized house, but that was on, like I said, this is confusing now because that plat is not the same as this plat. And did you have it redone or resurveyed, or what happened?
We have two
It's
very
the
various plats.
very last page. It's
Mr. Mac,
14.
may I just come up there and look at what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're actually on the two sides of,
Is it this one?
It's got-
I think he's
No, I
looking
don't know.
at page
I don't know who drew
Oh,
that.
I drew that there, and I did that purposely because I was measuring here, but the lines themselves, I mean, and the measurements and everything.
Staff has it printed out. It was basically the next
Yeah,
page.
it's the last page of the paperwork.
The reason that's in
Okay.
there.
You're looking at it, it's the second to last page, what you have.
Okay.
The reason that's in your materials, Mr. Mackel, is that there was that earlier October plat that was the actual drain field plat itself that Mr. Cairns prepared. And on that plat, you'll see, he has only drawn in the area of the building setbacks. And for illustration purposes, he showed on there a 20 by 40 foot dwelling. And it shows how far it would encroach into the rear setback if it was just done that way. So our application is based on this variance plat that shows, again, shows the amount of the requested variance.
Well, we are allowed to grant what variance we believe alleviates the condition. So we're not obligated necessarily to that request.
That's correct.
So, I mean, if it's feasible to move it 100 feet from the stream, I suppose that wouldn't be. I mean, if we had to adjust the variance in a different location, I would think that would be an option. I mean, I don't know that that really makes a difference, but maybe it does.
I would say if the concern is with the creek and the proximity to the creek. So in that case, rather than granting a variance from the rear property line, if we want to grant a variance, do it from the front property line. So it moves it forward on the lot and farther away from the stream.
but then doesn't the drain field, what happens with that drain field? If you move the house, don't you have to move?
Well, you're not moving it very far.
It shouldn't have a measurable effect.
15 feet, what is this?
So now we're talking about 25 feet forward.
Is it 25 feet?
24 feet?
But it would be 24 feet. And the front is the bottom of the plat.
Correct.
And that is a little more level.
Yes.
But this is actually a reserved drain field.
Yeah, it's reserved.
The main one's here, but.
Yeah. Maybe it was just being reserved.
No, I'm just.
So, that's Does that seem like a possibility?
Well, it would be a possibility, but it's also bringing up, which is another concern here, is that there has already been one variance in that area on the Stetka property, lot 46. That was granted a variance back in 16, I think it was. In fact, you were on board then. Part of the things with variances are that if you are granting variances, numerous variances in a certain area, that is a problem. I mean,
But what
take the
defines,
class, you read the law.
what defines numerous, more than one?
They don't define it.
Okay.
But
Well, one
But
issue,
looking at this also, it appears that there may be some other lots in that area, because the lots have been sold off and combined, so I know the Chandlers bought lots, and they combined them into, I think they took 3 and made them single lots, and then sold them off, but it left a couple of lots that are single lots, which, there again, you can't possibly meet the setbacks. But one variance has been granted. If we grant another variance over here, if that lot gets sold and somebody comes to us, we
well, I mean, each one, I mean, does that one have a house site that was approved by the county? Does that one you're talking about have a house site that?
the only house sites that were approved up there were on the Batchelder properties. And I think, and that's sort of commonplace now, I think, in these subdivision plats, is that they put in, for real estate purposes particularly, a qualified house site. So somebody buying the property, which is what Mr. Thomas did, he looked at the plat, it had a house site on there, said approved by the county, and he bought it. And now we're telling him, you can't, if the county made a mistake, that's not Mr. Thomas's fault.
Well, so in effect, they could withdraw their application for a variance under the assurance that you're giving that he can build on it, but maybe they don't want to do that.
If Mr. Macwa held an office in the county that we could, and that's intending no disrespect to Mr. Macwa at all, that we could rely on and know that we could then get our building permit
Right.
based on that, we would withdraw.
But see,
That's
that's,
right.
but they don't really have that.
Michelle, what's your reservation about Mr. Macro's argument? Or maybe you don't have one.
All I can say is BZA, if they need legal advice on this, you have a line item in your budget of $5,000 you haven't used yet.
Great answer.
Which is not to say that we need to get legal advice, but it might.
And I will add in here also, because this is very frustrating, and all the facts need to be known, is that in 2016, the Cathels requested the then zoning administrator to come up and reevaluate that law as to whether it was, in fact, agriculture or conservation. And that did not take place. It was ignored, whatever. It was, and as a zoning administrator, if a request is made, it's not, you don't have the option to just say, oh, no, I'm not going to do it. You have to make a decision. That decision was not made.
And how are you aware of that?
Because it's in the materials that we received. It was contained in an email and a topo map right here from the Cathels on June 9th, 2016 to Debbie Kaiser, and they have enclosed a topo map which this particular topo map doesn't have the elevations on it, but the topo map that was done, the most recent one, has it on there. And if you do the math, you find that, and it's confusing in our code because on conservation, it does not specify, it talks about slope, but it does not specify a degree of slope. If you go to other people's zoning ordinances and maps, whatever, 15 degrees tends to be the accepted figure. If you do the math on Mr. Thomas's property, it's about 4.38 degrees of rise. It starts out at 490 feet on one end and goes up to 516. It's a very gentle slope. And if you look around at the agricultural property next door, it's all the same.
Yeah.
And then at the stream, it rises up, and at the Cathel's property, it rises up.
Well, we can interpret maps. That's one of our functions.
It's on the survey in black and white. That made it really helpful when I saw that. And that they had actually done it with the GIS and had the altitudes on there.
Okay, well, at the risk of being here all night, we should come up with some sort of plan of action.
Well, one option, as I understand it, is to have, adopt a variance with a 100-foot setback from the stream. And is that possible for you?
If you say it again, please.
Would you be okay if we gave a variance that required a 100-foot setback from the stream, but made up the difference in the front? You could do that.
That would be acceptable, yes.
Okay, well, why don't we consider that? And that addresses the stream issue.
We have to do the findings.
Would you like me to read that?
Sure. Well, what we probably should do is have a motion.
I'll make that motion, that
Okay.
we approve variance with a 100-foot setback from the stream.
And there's no variance needed on the sides under that circumstance, just on the front? I mean, I just want to make sure.
Well, we can't just say a variance on the front. There's got to be a figure associated with that.
Well, no, hold on a second. What I'm saying is, I just want to make sure that if we move the building forward, that we're not creating a need for a variance on either side. You don't see that?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
So he's asking for, is it 26 feet of variance? Is that what it is?
24 was?
24? What is the?
About 24.
And also because of the nature of the rear of the property line, it has to be 24 feet from some point, really, to be valid. It's not a straight line there. So
Well, I mean,
if
it's
you
the
say,
closest that the building comes to the property line.
Okay, but that-
Mr. Chairman, I think if the board was inclined to grant a variance from the front property, a setback of 25 feet, you can see where the front line,
Is that the road?
if you don't mind me.
The road is at the bottom.
Yeah, I think, with the 100-foot front setback being this line right here, I think if this board found it appropriate to simply grant a variance of that 25 feet
Yeah.
forward, that's going to permit Mr. Thomas to construct that house there and maintain a 100-foot rear
But so
setback.
we're gonna.
It's going to require him to reconfigure some of the proposed drain field, but that's probably within.
But what we could do is allow that footprint of house, but making sure that it's 100 feet off the back.
Or it could be worded that way, yes, sir. I think
Would that be an okay way to word
100
it?
feet off the lot.
100 feet off the ranch.
So that way, I mean, we don't have a protractor here to measure it, but we just want to make sure that it's 100 feet off of the stream at all possible measurements. Would that be, would that sound like something that you would?
Yeah.
So we'd be granting a variance on the front setback, which would be about 25 feet, but which would require that the building be moved forward so that it is in no place less than 100 feet from the stream.
Correct.
Okay, so the motion is that the variance for front of the house, that it be, was it 25 feet?
Would be reduced by
Reduced
25.
by-
But we're just allowing
feet,
him,
and that there be 100-foot setbacks.
we're allowing him to put that
Basically,
footprint.
you're looking at a 75-foot setback from the road.
Well, just so
Yeah,
you can
that's good.
get that. What I'm getting at is he's got a footprint,
It's a triangle.
he's got a footprint that he's proposed, and, because it is an odd shape, you know, it's not square, so. Okay,
That sounds good.
is there a second to that motion?
So we're not gonna make the findings?
Well, we make the findings after, I just wanted to have it clear what we were
Okay.
offering, what we were proposing.
I wanted to hear you say it, did you,
Do we have a second?
can you state the motion?
The motion is that we would adjust the setback so that the rear of the property setback was at least 100 feet off of the stream. He can put that footprint of building and move it forward, and we've relaxed the setback on the front by about 25 feet.
I'll second that.
Okay. Now, any further discussion, and then we'll definitely do your, is there any further discussion on it? Okay, so Julie, if you would like to read the findings, and then we'll each have to make the findings.
All right, so it's the strict application of this chapter, which is section 170-36 variances, would produce undue hardship relating to the property. That's 1 of 4.
Okay, can you find that? Can you make that?
Yes, I can make that finding.
Ron, can you?
No.
No, okay, Ron cannot. Okay, I can make that finding.
And I can make that finding.
Yeah.
Okay.
The hardship is not shared generally by other properties in the same zoning district in the same vicinity. I can make that finding.
Ron?
No.
No, okay. And I can make that finding.
And I can make that finding.
Okay.
The authorization of the variance shall not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property, and that the character of the district shall not be changed by the granting of the variance.
Can you make that?
I can make that.
You make Ron, yes, okay. Julie, can you?
Yes.
I can
And
make that.
I think I can make that finding.
Okay.
the condition or situation of the property concerned is not of so general or recurring a nature as to make reasonably practicable the formulation of a general regulation to be adopted as an amendment to the ordinance. Absolutely not, I can make that finding.
You can make it?
I can.
Okay.
Sorry for the...
I can.
I can.
Okay. Okay, well, Ron, you're a no vote because
What?
you're a no vote because you have to make all those findings to grant variance. But it looks like everybody else is able to make those findings. Okay, is all in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
And you'll?
No.
No, okay,
Thank you all.
thank you. Okay, the next item is Okay, the next item is SBHD Siblings LLC, that's your deal? You want my turn?
Come on, Jackie, don't do that.
It was just a 10-minute extemporaneous speech. No, okay.
My client is not prepared remarks.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you're looking to do a tourist home on your property? And
An existing, yeah, a home.
an existing home?
Right, I'm not
Yes.
building anything.
And the acreage is 213? And there's no other dwelling on there right now?
With a barn, that's it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And a pool house, right?
And a pool house. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
If I could, just briefly, Mr. Scott, this application was actually filed before the adoption of the May amendments by the Board of Supervisors, the misnamed May amendments by the Board of Supervisors back on February 1st. I just wanted to very quickly, because those amendments now are in effect and would affect this application, I just wanted to go down the list very quickly because there are 2 or 3 that don't apply. And I thought that would be helpful for the board. The new standards for a tourist home is, of course, is that accommodations for not more than 10 transient occupants and more than 5 rooms. But we're talking about 4 people in 2 bedrooms in this small dwelling. Off-street parking, in accordance with Article 9, shall not be located in the park front yard and shall be effectively screened. Your materials show the location of this house in relation to the property lines. The parking clearly in this house is hundreds and hundreds of feet off of US Route 522, so it's not within the required front yard. I will say, in the interest of full disclosure to the board, you could see the pictures that I took. There is no real screening around the parking area itself, but I would submit that on a farm of 200 plus acres, I'm not sure that screening for that parking up next to the house is really an issue. In the residential and resource preservation zoning districts, the buildings shall not be more than 2 stories and have the exterior appearance of a single-family residence. I think you can see from the pictures that's the case here. In A and C zones, the minimum acreage, clearly Ms. Vogel's property meets the requirements of the minimum acreage requirements, the new ones. Number 5 refers to bed and breakfast in tourist homes authorized to serve meals. There is no proposed meal service in connection with this application. It's not a bed and breakfast, just a tourist home. 6, private roads or public roads other than primary, state, secondary roads have to meet the type 2 standards. There was some discussion about this at the Planning Commission meeting last week. It's clear that the understanding of that is not that Ms. Vogel's private farm road that runs from 522 back to the house has to meet the type 2 road standards. That's not the intention of that. It's that if she was served by a private right-of-way, or in fact was on a secondary road that, let's say, our friends at BoardDocs were not maintaining up to quite the standard that they should, that you would have to make a finding that it did meet the type 2 road standard. That doesn't apply to this private superior road. Number 7 is issuance by the zoning administrator of special permit conditioned upon the applicant obtaining a license required by 12 Virginia Administrative Code 5431. That administrative code applies to, again, hotels is the language that's used in that, although a hotel can be as small as 3 or 4 people. Again, serving meals, and that doesn't apply in this case. We're not seeking to serve any meals. And then the issuance of the permit is conditioned on the obtaining a VDOT entrance permit as required by the road design manual. There's an exchange of emails in the materials. Mr. Morris has looked at it. They actually approved the entrance when Ms. Vogel earlier was thinking about having events at this site. And he commented that he has no concern at all about this use with the entrance. But he literally couldn't produce the original entrance permit. The file was so old that they don't have access to it anymore. Otherwise, we would have given you a copy of the entrance permit. Number 9, you can impose conditions that you think are appropriate to limit noise, glare, that kind of thing. Let's see. 9A, let's see, maximum number of adults permitted shall not exceed twice the number of lodging units. That is the case here. Maximum 4 adults and 2 lodging units. Will include that lodgers shall be notified of any applicable local noise ordinances. That, of course, could be included in our materials, although we don't technically really have a noise ordinance at this time. The operational post within the residential dwelling, a clearly visible list of emergency information, location of fire extinguishers, pole alarms. We summarized in our statement of justification. Ms. Vogel will have that information available. This is also the fire extinguishers, which I know is one of Mr. Mackel's, and smoke detectors. Definitely, those are available in the dwelling. They will have a list of emergency contacts. They will also have Ms. Baldwin's emergency contact. She's the local property manager that will manage this when Ms. Vogel is out of town. So I covered D, which is the functioning smoke and fire detection. And the operator, and then finally E, the operator shall provide evidence that he has no less than $500,000 of liability insurance, or that the lodging use is connected to a hosting platform that provides equal or greater coverage. Ms. Bogle is going to be listing this property on Airbnb, and Airbnb hosts are automatically provided $1 million of liability coverage, and that is something that I forwarded to Ms. Summers. I don't know if that made it to your materials or not. So, we believe we've satisfied all the criteria, even the new ones, under the May amendment. We respectfully request your indulgence in granting this special permit. Thank you.
Questions?
No?
No questions?
I'll make a comment.
Sure.
I don't see any problems with this at all, but something we've started to add also, particularly on properties of this size, is that there's no discharge of firearms by the guests, which is actually doing you a favor. And also, in other areas, there have been problems with RVs on properties where they rent the house and then people show up with RVs and people are staying in the RVs, so there'd be no RV occupancy on the property.
The only thing that I would observe, I have just sort of as a lawyer, a philosophical concern about the no discharge of firearms provision. I am concerned about this board imposing that condition. I don't think that Ms. Bogle actually has any objection to that in this case. But it gives me an opportunity for just a moment to observe that I'm concerned about the board imposing a restriction that teeters on the edge of Second Amendment issues. I know you're not proposing to limit the right to bring on firearms onto the property, which would be, I think, a clear Second Amendment.
Right, there's no...
Right. But, you know, our Supreme Court has observed that the limitations on the use of a firearm are akin to limitations on the right to bear arms. And so I would only urge the board to consider carefully each instance in which you think it's appropriate to impose that condition. And again, I think if the board makes a finding that because of the specific character of a property in an application before it, that it's appropriate to impose some kind of a condition limiting the discharge of firearms. For example, if we were talking about one of the houses on one of the smaller lots, say on Water Street in the village of Sperryville, and for some reason that was a concern, the board chose to impose that kind of limitation because of the close proximity of other dwellings or other structures, I think that would be defensible. On a property of this size of over 200 acres, it might be observed that it could easily be a completely safe use of this property for guests to discharge firearms. So while I'm not pushing back in the sense of if the board finds that that's appropriate in this case, that you have the right to do that. I'm glad it came up because it's something that's been on my mind. I've heard it come up before, and it gives me an opportunity to address it this evening. Thank you. I appreciate the board's indulgence.
And I will accept, I think the point is well taken, and actually to perhaps make it even more, not necessarily more restrictive, but more, clear is that no discharge of firearms between 9 a.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning.
How about no discharge in the house?
Or what about this? That if you
I'm talking about
D&D,
it's not supposed to
But
disturb the
here's
neighborhood.
a question that I have. What if you have somebody who wants to hunt on that property?
right.
There's no hunting allowed on my property.
Here, this is what I was thinking is that
Well,
she
okay,
can
for
advise
you.
them.
Okay,
She
for
can
you.
advise them not to bring. She
For
can make
you,
that decision.
for you, that's one thing. But when you get into these larger properties, where you could conceivably rent it to somebody who wishes to hunt, and I could imagine that you have that restriction.
But it changes the whole thing if you say it's not us that is saying.
Yeah.
Ms.
Well,
Bogle, if she wants to think about whether or not she wants people coming with firearms and discharging them, And if she decides she doesn't want that, she can make that restriction. We can't.
Well, I think that we have done this, and we are,
Might be problem.
the other thing is the RVs. On a small property, having several RVs parked is a big deal. But on a 200-acre property, having a couple of RVs or even one parked near the house, well, I think yours said used, but, you know, I don't know. It is appropriate to some properties maybe, but not to others. So I
I know,
don't,
because it has to do with the effect on the neighborhood.
There's no
Irregardless of the size of the
There's no
property, we
neighborhood.
limit the number of bedrooms or whatever based on the size of the property. And because this happens on rental situations, particularly in rural areas where people rent a property, or, I mean, there's the outdoor access people that just rent property. And people can do whatever they want, and as many people can show
But
up,
they
or
could
whatever.
still
And we're not dealing with that
they
right
could
now,
still
but
do that.
I'm just trying to protect the adjacent property owners from any disturbance. And that's the type of thing that creates a disturbance. If you rent the house and 3 other people come, and suddenly you've got, 25, 30 people on this property, they decide to party all night, and at 12 midnight decide to go out and target practice, that's a disruption to the neighborhood, and we want to prevent that. And that's all I'm trying to do.
okay.
I would observe that would be a violation of the special permit, and it would be subject to enforcement action by the zoning administrator. I understand what you're doing, Mr. Matt. You're trying to draw that illustration for.
Right, but if it's in the house rules,
Well,
then
but
people
If
can't
somebody may
say,
be
well, we
going
didn't
across
do
the country and staying at Airbnbs, and they're doing it in their RV, and they're traveling in that vehicle.
and you have a
and just want to park.
200-acre property and one person spends the night in the RV, right?
Well, and I think that the staff recommended conditions cover some of these elements, Ron. 1 was a maximum of 4 people, and 2 is a maximum of 2 cars for a guest of the tourist home. So that implies that no RV or anything else.
I do have one question.
Agree with that?
Yeah, okay, I do have a question though about the signage of 20 square feet. I'm not sure, that seems pretty big, but I don't know. Is that necessary? Is that what the staff recommended?
Yeah, we'll go with Ms. Summers' recommendation. I don't think we.
Oh, that's based on the sign ordinance. That's based on the sign ordinance for farms, I believe. And that it is considered a farm, and
So that's the maximum.
that's the max, that's the size limitation on a farm sign.
I have a question.
But the zoning administrator has to straighten that out.
I believe it's my understanding, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I don't think that there's anything we can do here that would impinge on their right to hunt on their own property or to have their guests hunt on their own property during, a season and appropriate hours and things like this. But we can we actually
I'm not,
people's hunting
okay.
rights?
I agree with all that. Like I said, my concern is some protection for the neighbors in regards to firearms. And no, I'm not against, hunting during the day is not a problem.
How about
It's like I said, and basically, if you're out hunting at night, normally that's probably illegal anyways, because you're shining. So therefore, no discharge of firearms during the hours of darkness, which then that applies to the season or whatever, but normally there's no reason to be out hunting in the dark. And that way, like you said, you're not going to get people out there at 12 midnight deciding to do target practice. It was a great party and let's go out and
Okay.
whatever. That's my concern.
Okay, I think we've covered that topic pretty well.
Good.
Okay, at this point, anything else? At this point, I'm going to open the public comment portion of the hearing on this application. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak on this application? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing, or the public comment portion of the hearing. Would we be open to a motion? Who would make that motion?
I'll make the motion to approve with the staff recommended conditions of 1, a maximum of 4 people, 2, a maximum of 2 cars per guest of the tourist home, 3, no food service will be offered to the renters of this facility, 4, safety features will be installed in working conditions such as smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, working fire extinguisher, emergency contact, and a visible reflective address sign. It terminates upon the sale or transfer of the property and the sign restrictions.
I'll second.
So, hold on a second. Are you just for the sake of writing it down, you're just summarizing
The staff
the
recommendation.
staff recommendations? Okay, you're aware of it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, and there's nothing else there?
Yeah, I agree with Ron on the firearms, but I don't think the homeowner wants that anyway, so.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
Yeah, I second.
Okay. Is there further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Julie, I was wondering, that vote sheet, we should sign, everybody should sign those?
I just know the plan.
Oh, you need a pen. And then the next item on the agenda is, let's see if I find it here. The Jensby person. You could come forward if you like, you could just sit right there. That's fine, either way. Would you could introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about what you're applying for?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Johnny Emsby, and my family and I moved here. We bought property just about a year ago in Castle View Road. Very much enjoying the property. We've missed 2 weekends so far. You know, if it was better, I'd probably move here and work from here as well. Sadly, I can't do that quite yet, but one day hopefully it will be good enough for me to do so. We can't be at our house every weekend or every week, and we would like the flexibility to rent it out during the weekends or the other week when we're not here. That's the basics of what we're asking for. We've been granted in the summers that it is a tourist house application, therefore that's what's in front of you. I received the newly adopted requirements, and we went through them, and just pretty much like the previous applicants. It seems as if we can meet those, and it doesn't change anything in our applications as far as I can tell. And let's see, we've been in touch with all 4 of our closest neighbours. The closest neighbour, and they're, as far as I can tell, are in line with what we're asking for. The closest neighbour is about over 300 feet away. It's maybe Forbes. The Klutzes are 700 plus feet away. Anthony's Mayor 600 feet away, and then the other border is about 1,000 feet away. So there's a reasonable distance between the houses, and multiple rows of trees. In fact, there are 3 or 4 rows of trees between us and our closest neighbour. So. We do hope that our neighbours won't be disturbed by any one of our guests. Let me see, what else can I share here? We'll also ensure that our guests respect our neighbours' property, and that they should stay on our property, and make sure that the border is properly delineated, so that it's clear where they can go and where they can't go. We had a discussion with a neighbour who lives slightly further away who expressed a concern about that. We agreed with him that we would make clear in our documentation that we would say that they're not entitled to walk around on people's property, but some of our neighbours basically have an agreement amongst other neighbours that we can we can follow certain paths, but they won't be open to the tourist home renters. And that seems to address his concern. We have a pool, and we'll make sure there's a fence around it. We'll make sure there are proper safety instructions as well. We have fire extinguishers, multiple fire extinguishers, at least one on each floor that's properly sized. What we can do is make sure that they're properly mounted on the wall for accessibility, and make sure we have escape route maps in these places, and make sure it's clear what the exits are. We already have fire alarms in place. There are 2 buildings, the main house with 3 bedrooms, and a guest house with 2. And each building has at least 5 fire alarms. I have pictures of. I'll still take pictures of them. I've got pictures of them on my phone if you're interested in seeing them. But we already have interconnected fire alarms in place. That is pretty much it. Obviously, open to answering questions.
Are you going to do this through Airbnb, do you think?
Yes, Airbnb.
And are you going to advertise it for up to 10 people? Is that what you're thinking?
That would be the intent.
So question, so it's one house with 6 people and one building, the pool house with 4 people?
Yes.
And is that all going to be the same group?
Yes, we want to. The property as it's laid out isn't conducive to splitting it up and renting at the same time to different people.
So it would rent, there would be one group that would rent it, a family or a group?
Absolutely, we wouldn't want to have 2 groups here at the same time.
And there's the possibility that you might occupy the house and have a smaller group?
Theoretically, but right now I wouldn't
But
say
you
so.
don't see that necessarily?
No. Not at this point in time.
Is it any other questions?
Yeah.
No? Okay. You can sit down if you like. I'm going to open the public comment portion of this hearing. Is there anybody who'd like to speak on this application? Okay, I'm closing the public comment period. I will say one thing about the Planning Commission. They made a recommendation of approval for the first one and no recommendation on this.
I know.
But that doesn't really bear.
But were you there for that?
Yes, but I think that the reason what I see, it doesn't have any, I don't think that has any comment on yours. I think an issue there was the Planning Commission did not hold an advertised public hearing. And so I could see that someone who was opposed would not
Have
had notice necessarily and would not show up to speak. So it's almost like a indictment or whatever, a grand jury where you only hear one side.
Yeah.
So I think it probably, unless they hold a public hearing that is advertised.
They can't do it.
Well, they do sometimes, but I'm not sure that it's really, that they should.
Yeah.
Because you haven't necessarily heard everything. So it has nothing to do with your application, but I think that kind of came between the first one and yours. So
Alex, was that the reason for the 1 nay at the Planning Commission?
I think he opposed, was it a nay on this one?
Yeah, it was Schulen.
Brian?
I think maybe he thought we should have given an approval recommendation.
Oh, I see.
Like, because that's your
That's
recommendation.
confusing.
Yes, sir, there was a gentleman who was sitting right over there at that hearing.
Yeah.
He came over to me afterwards and said, I didn't want to frighten you there. I said nay because I felt the motion should have been to provide a recommendation to.
He thought that it should include a
I was going to
recommendation.
say, I agree with that, and what is the point of going to the Planning Commission if they're just going to, not just pass it by?
Well, what it is, my understanding is, Michelle, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the first pass at it is just to make sure the application is complete. So, and then to say, okay, well, we're going to pass it on to the Board of Zoning Appeals. But I disagree with giving recommendation without a public hearing. But that's just me.
The way our code is written, it requires that the planning commission hold a preliminary review of the application. By state law, the planning commission is not required to hold a public hearing.
Right.
They can decide they want to and go forward and hold that. Typically with these tourist homes that have checked all the boxes, they can just pass them along to the BZA.
But I think taking that step of recommendation or denial, a recommendation to deny,
Yeah.
might be premature without actually holding a public hearing. That's my point.
So it's not
So,
relevant to this issue anyways, right?
no, but I was just explaining why I think there wasn't a recommendation on this one, and there was on the previous one. And I don't think that makes us any less worthy of being approved. So that being said, do we?
So I move approval with the following conditions: maximum of 10 people, maximum of 4 cars for guests of the tourist home, no food service, safety features, which I think are all installed, but are working smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, working fire extinguisher, including 2 wall-on extinguishers, emergency contact list to include the address of the owner, I guess, of the rental, the sheriff's office, and permitted noise levels. I don't think we have a restriction on that. And then a visible reflective address sign at the property. And that the permit will terminate on the sale or transfer of the property.
Okay. So I'm just writing with the staff recommended conditions.
Okay.
I was going to say, one question also, how is the cell service in that area of Castleton? Or do you have landlines in the buildings?
The cell service is adequate. The phone, that is, voice works. Data, you've got to go to a special bedroom in the house.
We're okay with the data.
Ms. Ritter, would you have any problem adding an additional condition for new commercial signage or residential signage only?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to add that.
Okay, with that addition, so there's a motion, is there a second?
I'll make a second.
Julie? Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item is a variance that we're not hearing tonight. Is that right? We're not hearing this tonight, we're just setting it, deciding whether to set it for hearing. The applicants are here? You're the applicants, okay. Has everybody had a chance to look at the application?
Yeah.
One of you could just tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Beer, and I'm here with my colleague Ronnie. We're representing Charles Wood Builders. And we found a property in Rappahannock County, which we quickly decided to close on. And if I could just read a little bit of my response to the criteria necessary to request the variance. Charles Wood Builders purchased this property intending to improve it by building a 2,200 to 2,400 foot structure. Along with the paperwork that we received from both realtors, we see that the Virginia Department of Health had certified the lot, recognizing that the soil and site conditions were suitable for the installation of an on-site sewage disposal system, and provided a plat showing an approved area for the sewage disposal system. The Virginia Department of Health continues to say that the area evaluated and certified is suitable to accommodate a 3-bedroom house using a system design of 450 gallons per day. The letter is attached in our package. The letter assures that a sewage disposal system construction permit would be issued provided no substantial changes in soil or site conditions where the system would be located had taken place. In our letter, we provided a link which led us to the property posting, and in the text on the for sale posting, the text reads, .93 acre lot ready to build with approved 3-bedroom certification. It continues to read that an updated plat shows proposed house location and well location and approved septic. The listing goes on to say that the property is not zoned farmland. We now discover after we purchased the property that yes, it isn't zoned farmland, but it is zoned agricultural. And having said that, the setbacks within the agricultural zoning prohibit us from building the 3-bedroom, 22 to 24 square foot house on that lot. So our variance, to boil it down, is asking for consideration with regard to the 100-foot setback in the front of the property and 50 foot around the perimeter. We're asking that you consider reducing that to a 20-foot, which I believe is your residential 2 zoning.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Are your neighbors, what's the situation with your neighbors? Do they have similar lots, or what's the neighborhood like?
So there are 2 properties near the lot that we purchased. One is to the left and directly and somewhat behind it. The other one is in front. Our property is an L shape.
Yes.
And if you see, we placed the house on the flat, allowing for the R2 zoning. The front of the house would be 100 foot from the center of the road, US Route 522, with 20-foot setbacks on the sides and the rear of the property. We looked at the property very closely to try to figure out if there was another place on the property that we could put the house.
Yeah.
Our problem with that is if we were to go down a little bit toward the bottom of this plat, we're running into setback issues again because we cannot have enough space between our property and the person in front of us.
So this was originally 2 plots were owned by the person who sold it to you, right?
That's what we understand, yes.
Yeah, and was the other one a J? I mean, I wonder what they thought they were going to do with this.
I'm not sure.
Well, have you not gone after the seller at all?
Well, we wanted to, avoid, getting the real estate agents angry if we thought there was still an opportunity for us to request a variance and still build the property. And I would like to add that the property already has a buyer, so it's not going to be, a spec home where we're going to bring a lot of traffic into the area to try to sell it. We already have a seller for it.
Is this all on one level, the building, the house?
It is one level with a loft. And actually, we have the floor plan here if you're interested in looking at it.
Okay, reading the real estate description, which is the same one, basically all the sites, under zoning, it says unknown.
Yes, you're right.
And basically, if you're buying a piece of property, that's one of the things that, you really need to check. You need to check on that before you buy the property. And why they did not put agriculture on there, I have no idea, but due diligence would tell you to determine what the zoning is prior to making the purchase. So I don't think we can take that into account in that, that was not a mistake.
Okay, so
in the county or whatever. And the other thing is that although the footprint is odd, it's 18 by 76 feet, I believe it is.
Yes, sir, roughly.
That would fit, there are houses that can be built that can fit into that configuration. Brownstones are an example. You build them, they're narrow. In fact, I pulled one off the internet. It's almost 3,000 square feet. It's narrow, it's 3 stories, but it would fit on that lot.
Okay, so I would suggest that tonight, we're not necessarily hearing this if But
That's
I
true.
think we're determining whether to set it for a hearing next month. I guess we would propose to hear this next month.
Yes, we'd like that, of course.
Okay. I mean, is that agreeable?
That's real.
I mean,
I
there-
think that's the way, I think that's the way to go, because
Yeah.
there might be a way of figuring this out.
I mean, it sounds like it is a lot that could be considered for a variance, but
It sounds like a self-created hardship then.
could be.
Yeah.
But we'd have to get into that and have the hearing, so. So are we agreed that we'll set it for
Yeah.
hearing? So we'll set it. to
We
be heard
appreciate your
next month.
consideration.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I don't think we need.
It's just tough, isn't it,
Do
Josh?
we need a vote for that? I don't think we need a vote for that. do we?
Your turn.
So Michelle will set this for next month. Okay, so the next item, we had two items. Ron had a discussion about zoning maps. You were interested in talking about it?
Yep, I think this, okay, the time this issue was actually the first time I'd ever seen the zoning map. And I think 4 of us probably are in the same situation. And when I saw it, I went, really?
Yeah,
It's magic marker lines?
yeah.
I mean, it's, I was somewhat amazed.
Yeah,
This was
because the line
done,
almost takes the entire way. So
I
you
mean,
don't
we-
know where it lies, really.
right, and I mean, we're required to make decisions on, zoning decisions or whatever. We have to, there has to be some definable basis for what the lines are. And if you read the information on the state code and everything, it's basically, it refers to property lines, roadways, stream beds, definable areas or whatever.
Right.
And we don't have that. And this was done in, I'm not sure when it was done. Was it done, were the zoning maps done in the 70s, or were they done in 84 or around there? But anyways, to my knowledge, the way it was done, which was technology at the time, I guess, is that they put the zoning map up on the wall, and they put a topo map on an overhead projector, and then they tried to sort of trace the topographic lines onto the tax map using a magic marker. But it's, I mean, you can just tell by looking at it, it's just nonsensical. It goes in places where you go, why is it going there? Why is, so.
And if you actually drive up to that property, it's just, I mean, that particular property is really quite, I know it goes down to the stream, but, and right, I mean, part of it is an agricultural, and right next to it is actually an agricultural. It just doesn't make all that much sense.
But anyways, it's 2021.
We can do that.
GIS has been around since the 60s. I think every other locality in probably the state of Virginia has zoning maps based on GIS, but not Rappahannock.
We don't have GIS here.
I went online today, and you just put in GIS for Rappahannock County. The county doesn't have GIS, but the rest of the world does. It's right there, and you look on the websites, and there's all kinds of stuff based on GIS. So we may not have it, but we have to have it. I mean, this is, just to show you, this is Stanton, Virginia's, and this one was pretty cool because it's all in color and everything. It's, and then when you go down on it, then you can see where the lines are and everything. So we need to, my recommendation is we write a letter to the Board of Supervisors stating that, we find them completely outdated, and it is budget time, so this would be a good time to get the recommendation to them, because it's not going to be free. But they need to the county needs to have GIS-based zoning maps, or a GIS-based zoning map.
Or else,
Because if, I mean, I just can't imagine going before a judge on a zoning case, if it got that far, and you show them something that's got magic marker lines on it, and what's he gonna say? I mean, it's like, are you kidding me?
It's just to have clear designations for conservation and agriculture. I mean, it just looks so arbitrary.
It is.
Yeah, that's what I mean, it's undefinable, it's just totally inadequate, and it needs to be changed, and we need to make that recommendation.
Property rights really depend on this being accurate.
Okay.
That's my
I mean, this is a legal document, technically.
Yeah.
Tough to do that.
Okay, so.
I don't think there's much we can do other than ask for it.
That's what I mean, yes, that's all, but we need to ask for it, formally ask for the county to, redo the zoning maps. And so, I mean, basically, just, by way of a letter from the chairman stating that,
Or should we, I mean, I'd be happy to talk and go before the planning commission. What do you think's the best?
Well,
We just.
I mean, okay, if you're talking about getting us involved in the GIS so that we can have all the properties on the map and then use that. I mean, I'm assuming.
and it's not just for us, it's for, I mean, the real estate people, I mean, you're a real estate person, I mean.
No, I understand. We have these maps, but these are not digitized, to my knowledge.
They're not what?
Digital. These
No, they certainly aren't.
But, these boundaries are surprisingly accurate. I mean, in terms of the shapes of the parcels. So I think.
Which lines are you talking about?
They're not, they're going through the middle.
Wait,
of the
no, I'm saying most of the parcels
Oh, the parcels,
are
yes,
fairly well depicted.
yes.
So it's,
Although somewhat antiquated at
It's the
times, but,
Yeah, it's the zone,
so,
exactly. It's the zone.
And they should be made to conform with the standards that are set up to do this, like property lines, major geographical,
Roads.
well, I mean, there are instances where it is appropriate that a property has some of one zone and some of
That
another.
would be some kind of major geographical thing, like a river was going through it, or there was
Or
a
the
escarpment,
slope,
or
or the
some
Yes, or the something, yeah.
Or valuable
So-
timber or something.
Right. But I mean, it would be geologically definitive in some of them, wouldn't it?
I mean, basically, if a GIS-based zoning map would also have the topographical lines on their altitude and everything, so that's where it becomes defensible on, particularly conservation, where if you're basing it on slope or whatever, and it's following the contour lines, then yes, now that you've got a defensible thing there, but this has no, what we have right now does not have any topo features on it, so the lines are anywhere.
So one of our duties or responsibilities can be interpreting the zoning maps.
But it-
Yes,
you may-
that is one of our
it's a little
responsibilities, and we,
nerve-wracking. have all these
I
folks
can't
that you're
interpret
telling
this.
What you're doing is ruining our conservation zone, when it's not even clear that it's entirely in the
Right, I
conservation
understand.
zone, and it probably shouldn't be in the conservation zone anyway, because it doesn't fit,
Right.
so.
So that's not even really an interpretation.
Right.
It's more of a determination of.
Yeah, I would
what
say
should
sort of
be.
an instinctive decision.
So I don't know what specifically, I mean, what would we be specifically asking for?
For zoning maps that are put to, meet the current standard, basically, because the standard is GIS.
Or the description, even a description of what, a clearer description of what constitutes a conservation zone. Like the difference between a 2% grade and a.
But it applies to all the zoning. I mean, it's like I said, I mean, basically, we need a map that looks like everybody else's map that's got their zoning. I mean, like I said, you go to all the counties and you just put in zoning maps, and these GIS maps come up, except for Rappahannock. We don't have it, and like I said, that's not.
So really, we want GIS, is what you're.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Okay, but I mean, that's a little different. Okay, so, I don't know, in this budget cycle, are we gonna get that?
Maybe if we ask for it, or, make them aware of the fact that, I mean, it's gotta happen sometime.
So maybe,
You can't go on with these things. It's ridiculous.
so maybe
It's
we.
something that is defensible.
Yeah. No, I understand, I'm just trying to figure out, you'd have to have GIS tied to the boundaries actually displayed.
The existing boundaries and
And it would probably necessitate, in the end of that process, that the Board of Supervisors is then gonna have to reapprove the zoning based on, because the lines, I'm sure, will change somewhat.
And so this could be, what, several $100,000?
I don't know, it's
I mean,
gotta be done, everybody else has done it.
Okay.
I just think we're gonna get sued.
Well, but I'm just trying to say, if we would write them a letter saying that we feel the need is here for getting on board with GIS.
Yeah.
And that's gonna go, and then,
It's gotta start somewhere.
I think, isn't it more than GIF? We want the boundaries to conform to the
well, you're talking about.
regulations for boundaries.
Well, basically, it's acceptable standards.
But you need the boundaries and affixed to the topo so that you could tell what delineates
Right.
the zone. And then, of course, you're talking about rezoning a lot of properties, right?
Yeah, implicit.
I mean, if we change the zone.
It would not necessarily be rezoning, it would be it would entail boundary adjustments on the lines that designate the zoning,
But in other words, what you're describing, unless we go with the lines as they are now.
I'm not deciding anything, that's not my decision.
Well, no, what I'm saying is if we ask them to do this, and then if you adjust the boundaries, then you're gonna take some properties and change the zoning.
Possibly, yeah.
Yes, and so that's a bigger deal than just drawing them out.
Gotta do it sometime.
Well, the zoning that's in place will be in place. I mean, it's whatever's there is carved in stone. It's the future we're working with, right?
I don't know, I mean, because you have I agree that this isn't perfect, but you do have a line that can be more or less figured out on each property where it is.
Right.
Now, it may not be appropriate.
I don't know, look at number 42 or 40, it
What
just sort of
one?
meanders around in the parcel. I mean, if I were Michelle,
Well, yeah.
I don't know how you figure out where that conservation zone is.
Well, but if you took, because these plat depictions of the boundaries are shape-wise pretty accurate, I found, mostly. So you could take your property and set it down there and say, okay, this part is conservation zone, this part is agricultural. And then if we adjusted it, so we moved it to go to the mountain, then we might expose a whole lot of acreage to be a different zone. And that is a change,
Well, say 3
So
zones.
your argument is basically if we move the line to what is actually in a conservation district, that's a problem.
Well, it's a change in the zoning, which is a rezoning, which
Yeah.
affects the rights of all the people that you do
No, I
that to.
understand that.
And if we were doing it, you can't just do it to some and not to others. So you might have hundreds of people.
That assumes this is completely off in terms of,
Well, we've looked at one example and seen where it
Yeah.
probably could be agricultural and not conservation.
right.
So,
In what is, it hasn't gone forward ever. I dare say, it's just like a zoning ordinance or anything else. If you put one of these in front of a judge, you go, this is unacceptable, and the court does not refuses to accept it, you need to do something, and therefore, at that point in time, you've got nothing.
Well, that might.
It's just like, it's
I don't
just like
see
what
it.
happened for Virginia Beach years ago, when they had a zoning problem, and it went before the judge, and it was restrictive zoning, and the judge threw the whole zoning package out, and it was chaos until they could write a new zoning ordinance, and it caused all kinds of problems down there, and it was just took one judge to do that.
Okay, well, I think maybe we could start out with a plug for GIS.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, what you.
Well, yes, that's, I mean, it's
Yeah,
a simple
okay, so
request.
But because what you would have to do, I would say, is you would have to put, as arbitrary as these are, you would have to put these boundaries for the zoning districts on to start with.
Yeah.
Well, yes, you work with what's there, but you adjust it to identifiable boundaries.
So then that next step is gonna require public hearings for, I would say, for each property that has a zoning change. And you might have 1,000 or 10,000, well, I don't know how many, 1,000 properties that are affected. So,
I'm not certain about that.
Yeah, well, you're
It's
not.
gotta be done.
Well, okay. So how about we put in a plug to the supervisors and the planning commission that suggests that our information system about our property boundaries and zoning is antiquated and we would need.
Yeah, I think we should just show them this. You know, it looks, I mean, it just,
So I can come up with a letter for next meeting?
Yeah, that's,
Circulate?
Next
Okay.
meeting will be too late.
For the budget, but.
Yeah.
yeah, we gotta do the budget, but also, and quite honestly, I'm not, you know, I'm confident that you, I'm,
dollars to get GIS? Well,
I'm confident that you could, you know, you can write a letter to the Board of Supervisors and send a copy to the Planning Commission, but because we're in the budget process right now, we don't want to be putting it off, because if it's going to be a budget issue, the county manager's got to start working on it now. So if we write a letter now, and you send it to the Board of Supervisors, they will get it for their March meeting, and it's in their hands. And so the issue has been raised.
Practically speaking, though, I think I've heard all of the supervisors talk about GIS in many different meetings, and there is not an appetite for it.
yeah, because they're worried about.
But maybe because they haven't really, because of this issue, the appetite has to do with around the villages particularly, and that there's certain people that don't want to define those
Well, the
boundaries.
specific reference I heard just a week or two ago was privacy concerns.
privacy.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, I don't think there is I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree, but I'm saying, I don't think a letter from us is going to cause any change, at least at this point in time in this budget. So, I mean, we can.
Unless it was something just to allocate something to just initiate
A study.
looking into it. Yeah.
Look at the implications.
Well, to initiate, I mean, I suppose we could do something, but I don't think we have the funds to do much.
You know,
That's a
like I
massive
said,
undertaking.
Well, I mean, I know there was somebody who was working on it, and it was kind of his pet project, but unfortunately he died.
Yeah,
But,
that's too bad.
and he'd been working on it for years, and
Did you
I'd
fail?
gone cheaply, and anyway. So, a letter from me to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors.
It's just raising the issue.
Well, Michelle, can I ask, do you have trouble with this map, or do you find it comprehensible? Maybe you actually have to go out there and figure out where.
I look at it every day. So, I mean, yeah, it could be better, but we deal with what we have.
Well, I mean, I do think just from my experience with these maps is you can generally tell where the zone changes on a piece of property.
Because you can see it in the property.
Well, you can look at the plat and you can say, okay, here's the line goes from here to here. This side is one zone, that side is another. I mean, you can apply that to most parcels. Now, I don't know about the thickness of the line. I mean, that's,
20 yards.
yeah, I mean, it's not hugely significant.
Well, it's really significant if it's an acre lot.
Well, on
Takes
an
up
acre
practically
lot.
the whole thing.
But I would think an acre lot, it would be better if it was one zone, probably. Anyway. Okay, so we'll raise the issue of the inadequacy.
Yeah, I'm not making, I'm just raising, you know, like I
Okay.
said, raise the issue that, you know,
Okay.
it's a problem and
Okay.
it needs to be looked at.
Okay. Okay, I'll compose a letter and send it
Yeah.
down. Okay. Now, the next and last item is the budget. And Ron,
I have the good sense to bring the old one.
I'm thinking we're probably okay with the same budget.
Yes.
I mean, we, you know, we have not made a recommendation and we are required to do that and,
I mean,
This is what we, you handed it.
For last year.
Yeah.
I don't know if Bill was. Is that all we need to do? Just
I
resubmit that?
I guess, I mean, it's
So,
budget
Michelle-
time and we gotta tell them what, you know, what we want for money.
We did have legal fees, and I don't think we've used any this year.
That's correct.
But we could potentially if we have a need between now and June 30th.
Yes.
But then that goes away.
That rolls over
Then
in
we
the
need-
general fund then and.
Is that
start all over
right? I
again.
mean, those funds are not available next year unless we budget for them. Is that right?
Correct.
If we don't use them, they're.
Yeah, if you don't use it, you lose it and then you
And
start all over again.
I'm sure, you know, the same budget will be.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, do we wish to, Julie, have you seen it? Or I could just read it. And
Well,
like,
I can just hand it, I don't need the piece of
travel,
paper back.
travel and training, $1,200. And we've got a couple of new members. Does that seem adequate?
No, I don't think so, because, well, I know I had training, you had training, I know.
I've read it, everybody signed up, I mean, I'm
Okay.
online to figure out when they're
So
gonna.
do you
Bill
think-
wanted to do training too, I think.
Yep.
Oh, okay, so
Well,
we
I said yours would come out of this budget.
I
And
think
actually,
so, right?
if they go
Yeah.
anytime before June to get training, that would come out of the present
It
budget,
doesn't
not,
look like it's being
not the
offered.
new budget, so.
But so maybe we should do $1,800 maybe? Just-
Well, it's $500 a session, so.
Right. I
Okay.
wrote them a letter asking them when the next session was, an email, and they got back.
But that doesn't count travel.
And it can also just be a
It's
plate.
all online now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So what about allowing for $1,500?
I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, that would take time.
Okay, so $1,500 travel and training. And then office supplies was 200. Is there an issue with office supplies?
I was gonna say, Michelle, your office supplies are covered, you know, under your budget, right?
Yeah.
So, unless you have any,
200
Well, I mean, I don't really know what it's for.
office supplies, whatever we do. 200?
just put in 200 in case she needs copy paper or something.
Yeah.
And then advertising. And I think I'd probably say the same thing each time. That is self-funding because it's funded out of the applications.
Correct.
So,
But doesn't it still, don't we still have to have it included in our budget even though
Well, yes.
No, it doesn't.
it's flow through, but,
does $3,600 cover it
Yes.
for a year?
Mhm.
Okay, so let's leave that. And then legal services, 5,000. I mean, we could leave that figure.
leave that figure in
I mean,
there.
if something
We never know.
does come up,
Yeah,
we'll
you
use
could
it.
ask a question and
Okay.
that would be that.
If it's not enough. we
And then
just ask for more.
salaries and wages.
What is, who gets paid?
And that's figured out.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta track every so often.
Oh, really?
Are we
Once a year.
Are we $30 a meeting?
It's figured out by the amount you get paid, each member for each meeting,
for the entire year. So
For
that's
12
pretty
months.
figured out.
Yeah, it's got a map, it's, you know, it's gonna be once a month if we meet every month, but there, like this past year, there's gonna be money left over, but,
So,
hopefully next year we'll,
I
but
think
we
it's like
are,
20 a meeting or something like that.
yeah, it's per meeting.
we are though seeming to have meetings almost every month now.
Yeah, and we figured it out for the
Okay.
entire year.
Okay,
That figure that's there is figured out for the
so
entire
this
year.
is 5,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless, of course, they wanna give us a raise.
Well, yeah.
I don't think it's gonna increase for a really long time.
Okay, so
Need this or-
I'd like to see
Anyway.
it seems like we've come up with a budget of travel and training, 1,500, office supplies, 200, advertising, 3,600, legal services, 5,000, salaries and wages, 5,000. Is that, can I have a motion to,
Yeah,
I
move that we adopt that.
okay,
Second. Or you can second, whatever.
who wants the second, Ron?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Steph. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Great, good job.
Now, there's one last item that's it's the one I've been looking for all evening. A motion to adjourn.
Yeah. So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.